Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight. Thank you for giving up your time. I know Wigan is a bit more of a rugby town, but in my area of Tower Hamlets last night, the horns didn't stop beeping and the football choruses didn't stop till about 2 o'clock this morning. So if you're like me, you're probably feeling a little tired this evening. So thank you for coming. So there are plenty of people around, many of them in our government, who will tell women that we don't need to worry our pretty little heads anymore about feminism or women's oppression because we're all equal now. We can do anything we want. There is no structural discrimination against women. And even those who do argue that women are discriminated against and oppressed often advance a strategy for tackling that oppression, which involves individual advancement. So they will say, if you want to change things, you must conform, succeed, try and batter through the glass ceiling, put on your smart power dress clothes, become an entrepreneur, a role model, and so on. And tonight I want to talk about a very different tradition, which is in the book that Layla kindly mentioned, which is a tradition that says the oppressed can achieve far more if they organise collectively, that it is the struggle for women's rights, but also against slavery, against racism, and against exploitation. It's within these struggles that women have risen highest, that women rise highest when they rise, not as individuals seeking personal advancement, but as part of a general collective challenge to the discrimination and oppression that we face. So that's the kind of tradition in the book. The book began life as a series of Facebook posts during the first lockdown, just over a year ago now. And if you think back to that time, it was very confusing, quite scary, and particularly for socialists, because our instinct is always to organise together, isn't it? It's always to find ways to be collective, to find some kind of way to challenge the system, and we couldn't. We couldn't meet collectively, we couldn't demonstrate, we couldn't do any more than bang pots and pans on our doorstep. So the kind of idea behind the Facebook posts was to find ways from the past that could encourage us to keep that resistance going. Stories of women who had fought against the most appalling oppression, against lynchings, against slavery, against violence, all kinds of hideous situations in which women had found the courage, the passion, and the collective strength to fight back and resist. So that was the idea behind it, but then it became also a bit of a reflection of the way that the struggle and the resistance did develop, even under the difficult situation of lockdown. So the stories were not just about the past, looking at the past to keep us going, they were also responding to the battles that women today were involved in. So the first big change was in the summer when the Black Lives Matter protests erupted. And that made me think, oh, I need to go back, not just to Angela Davis of the Black Panthers, but to a whole number of other Black women activists in America and Britain, Elaine Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, Claudia Jones, women who blazed a trail for Black women and set a standard of resistance. And then the statue of Edward Colston went in the dock, and that made me think about the women who had challenged in real life the physical statue makers, the people who became statues, the generals, the politicians, the colonialists, who had stood up against them. And that sent me to Nanny of the Maroons, a Jamaican woman who defeated the British Army, a guerrilla fighter at the end of the 17th century, who forced the British Army to sign a treaty with her. She was such a powerful guerrilla fighter. Another woman, Princess Janissaye, who was a military leader during the Indian Mutiny of 1857, and there's a film out at the moment called Warrior Queen, which completely sanitizes this history and portrays Queen Victoria as weeping over the plight of the Indian colonial subjects, who were, of course, which is very, very far from the truth. But also women like Sanité Belair, who fought alongside Toussaint Louverture in the great revolution of slaves, the great slave revolt of Haiti, and an amazing woman called Pritila Wadaha. So where I am in Tower Hamlets, we have a high percentage of people who come from a Bengali background, and I work with many Bengali heritage women. And so they were helping me dig up all these incredible Bengali women who'd fought against British colonialism. And Pritilada, an educated woman, had joined the Indian nationalist movement to try and kick the British out of India. And one night they raided a club which had a sign outside saying no dogs, no Indians, even though it was in the middle of what is now what was then Bangladesh. And so she led this raid and she was shot by a British soldier. And rather than give in, surrender and be captured, she swallowed a cyanide tablet, and there are now statues to her. And she was 21 years old. And I thought that courage, that commitment, that principled opposition to colonialism, to the British Empire is so inspiring. And then in the summer last year, we had a number of strikes in Tower Hamlets Council, which were again, many of the leading figures were young Bengali women. And that made me think about the Match Women strike in Tower Hamlets, another very similar strike of chocolate makers, a strike of black women, washer women in Alabama, Jewish women in the textile industries in New York, and Grunwick's, a very memorable strike in the 1970s in Britain, which I know Fred has lots of personal experience about. I'm lucky enough for him to have told me about it. So these were strikes which made women visible, women who were downtrodden, women who were despised, women who were seen as incapable of political organisation, not worthy to join trade unions, not up to it, transformed that view of how women were seen in the working class movement and established women as class fighters. So the Facebook post, the most common reaction I got was, why didn't I know about this woman? Here are women doing all the incredible things, speaking, organising, leading military battalions, and yet lots of people, including me, have not heard of many of them. And I think it is a disgrace that we are still, 50 years after Sheila Rowbotham, a socialist feminist, published Hidden from History, we are still fighting to recover women's stories. And I think partly this is something that George Orwell, as a socialist writer and so on, said, that those who control the present also control the past. So you think of our politicians and our government today, they promote an idea that history is made by kings and queens, by bishops, by advisors, by the people at the top of society. They don't see the labour of the slaves, the Irish immigrants who built the railways. They don't see the work done by women and children in the factories in the 19th century. This disappears from the story, and it is simply a progression of kings and queens who just get better and better until eventually we get to Alexander de Piffle, Boris Johnson and William Rees-Mogg, so on, and they are somehow the pinnacle of historical development. But it's also true that for women, there are specific ways in which women are written out of history. So all working class people are written out. For women, there are a couple of specific ways. And one of these is the secretarial question. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Give me a shout if you can't see it. The secretarial question: if a man is a secretary of a trade union branch or a political party, it is considered to be a job of importance, authority, leadership. If a woman is described as a secretary, historians simply assume they were there to make the tea and take the notes. So this woman, Elena Stasova, was a absolutely rock hard Russian socialist, one of the first people to join the Russian Revolutionary Bolshevik Party. She was known as the Absolute because she was so dedicated, so scary. There she is telling Lenin a thing or two in a picture. She was the secretary of the Central Committee of the Russian Revolutionary Party in 1905 and in 1917, but you cannot read about her in histories of the Russian Revolution. Despite her enormous contribution, she has been completely written out. The second question is the sex question. So this kind of goes along the lines that men do stuff, they organise, they build, they lead. Women just have relationships with them. Women are about children, about love, and they don't influence events in the same way. So this woman is Inessa Armand, an incredible, again, a Russian revolutionary who was imprisoned, exiled, escaped from exile, lived in the war, the First World War. She launched a theoretical paper for women. She was part of a huge movement to free women after the Russian Revolution of 1917. She did all this before she was 46, because she died when she was 46, and with these 5 children. And yet if you read biographies and histories of the time, they simply want to, oh, sorry, that's my son phoning. They simply talk about whether she had sex with Lenin and the nature of their relationship, because that's what's important about women. So the third question is the question of celebrity. If a woman is, I'm sure this happens to men too, but if a woman is a celebrity, then the political dimensions of her life are written out. This woman is Helen Keller. I'm a teacher in a primary school, and we often talk about Helen Keller and her huge achievements against adversity, because she was deaf and she couldn't speak and she was blind and she learned to communicate, a great role model. But what they don't tell you in school is that Helen Keller was a revolutionary socialist, an opponent of the First World War, and a supporter of the Russian Revolution. In 1911, Helen explained her commitment to socialism. The few own the many because they possess the means of livelihood of all. The country is governed for the richest, for the corporations, for the bankers, for the land speculators, and for the exploiters of labour. The majority of mankind are working people, and as long as their fair demands are set at naught, we can have neither men's rights nor women's rights. So this incredible woman who fought against this adversity has had that aspect of her life completely written out of history. So sex, celebrity, and the secretarial question. So those are the specific ways I think women are written out of history. But I just want to move on really to giving some examples of the incredible women that I've managed to just give you a little flavour of in the book, and hope to encourage people to find out more about. So the only criteria for inclusion in the book was that these were women who smashed conventions, not through personal ambition, not because they wanted a seat at the top table, but because they wanted to overturn the top table, not just for themselves, but for all those who are downtrodden and oppressed. And that personal courage existed across national and international borders. So this woman on your screen is a woman called Mother Jones, one of the great American trade union activists. I'm a humanitarian, not a hellraiser, the meme says. She also had the quote, mourn the dead and fight like hell for the living. And she knew a lot about death because she was born in Ireland in 1837. Her family had to leave because of the Irish famine, in which millions of Irish people died despite grain being exported to Britain. 4 of her children and her husband all died in yellow fever outbreak, and her shop burnt down in the Chicago fire of 1871. Now that would be enough to finish off most of us, but Mother Jones became one of the most powerful Labour leaders in American history at a time when to be a Labour leader meant dealing with battles, gunfire. You know, that Labour leaders and activists were regularly shot by hired gangs hired by employers and mine owners and so on. So in 1902, she was arrested and put on trial because she went to support striking miners. And this is what the district attorney said: "There sits the most dangerous woman in America. She comes to a state where peace and prosperity reign, crooks her finger, and 20,000 contented men lay down their tools and walk out. If only I can hear you say it was that easy." Mother Jones very famously organised children who worked in the mines and the factories. And this quote says, "Someday the workers will take possession of your city hall, and when we do, no child will be sacrificed on the altar of profit." And I think she channeled the grief she felt for her own family into that fight on behalf of all children who were forced to waste their childhood in factories and mills and mines. These young women are part of an outbreak of strikes and struggles which hit the textile industry in New York between 1909 and 1911. Many of them were Jewish. You can see the banner, "Abolish Slavery," and the same thing in Yiddish. There was a huge strike. The song "Bread and Roses," if any of you know it, was written to commemorate it. There'd been all kinds of wildcat strikes, and it kind of came to a head on the 22nd of November 1911. Thousands of young women who worked very much like women in the textile industry in Bangladesh and places today, incredibly unhygienic, unsafe conditions. On the 22nd of November, thousands of young women packed into a hall to discuss a call for a strike. They listened for 2 hours while speakers urged caution. We've all been in that meeting. Then Clara Lemich demanded to speak. She spoke in Yiddish, and she was so small she had to be lifted onto the platform, and she electrified the crowd. She said, "I am a working girl, one of those who are on strike against intolerable conditions, and I am tired of listening to speakers who speak in general terms. What we are here to decide is whether we shall or shall not strike. I demand a general strike be declared immediately," and it was. And the following morning, 15,000 workers were out. And by the evening, it was 20,000, 90% of whom were Jewish immigrants and 70% of whom were women. And they won huge concessions. And that's Claire there. She had broken ribs fighting with police on the picket line and was arrested many times. So I'm going to move on a little bit now, because I think my time speaking is coming to an end. So in the book, there are many, many stories of heroic women who battled slavery, racism and exploitation. But the most exciting and significant are those who led revolutions, not just against oppression, but against the society that breeds oppression. This is Elizabeth Dimitrov, who was 21 years old when Karl Marx asked her to go and play a leading role in the Paris Commune of 1871, where women showed that they could lead, they could organize collectively, cooperatively, the seeds of a different society. This woman is Alexandra Kollontai, one of the greatest of the Russian revolutionary leaders, who worked for years tirelessly against war and against political tyranny, and saw after the revolution of 1917 the chance to create a different world, a world in which we have a share of the wealth we produce, a world in which we have democratic rights to say we want to live like this, to raise our children in a different way, to find collective solutions to the drudgery of the housework and shopping and cooking which we still endure today. So the book is a tiny taste of some of these massive battles that have shaped the modern world, but also a pointer to the future in which women can play a revolutionary role in completely transforming society and building something decent and better, democratic and socialist and collective. And women are central to that process, as they always have been.